They didn't fire me. Not officially. They just made it so quiet around me that I could hear myself disappearing. I was 58 when I got the call. One blood test, followed by a biopsy, then the kind of silence you only get from doctors who don't want to speak too soon. The diagnosis was lymphoma. Stage 2. Treatable, they said, if caught early, if I rested, if I took time off. But time off wasn't something I'd ever allowed myself. Not in 26 years of service at Holloway Cross, one of the oldest logistics consulting firms in Milwaukee. And not now, when the entire Western Freight division, our biggest account, was still running on systems I helped build from scratch. I had spent more than 2 decades translating chaos into efficiency, earning the nickname The Fixer in a firm that didn't offer many second chances. I'd walked through recessions, layoffs, office moves, and 3 CEO transitions. I mentored kids who now outranked me. I cleaned up messes from departments that never learned my name. And I did it all without asking for anything more than a fair review and the dignity of being heard. But cancer doesn't wait for the quarterly reports or executive approval. It just arrives uninvited, unapologetic, and in my case, at the exact moment I thought I might finally be due some recognition. So I wrote the email, calm, professional, backed by numbers, project outcomes, retention stats, and comparative salary benchmarks from competitors. Not a plea, not a complaint. Just a request to revisit the conversation we'd postponed for 3 years. I sent it to Brentha, new COO, fresh out of Silicon Valley, all sharp suits and lean model Mantrasand copied HR, like I was supposed to. Then I waited. A week, 2, nothing. At first, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He was busy, new kid, big desk, lots of buzzwords to memorize. But then came the Friday I'll never forget. I walked into the 9 a.m. strategy meeting and found my chair already occupied. Logan, 32, charming, zero client-facing experience, was sitting in my seat, reviewing my slides, leading the discussion with the kind of forced confidence only someone freshly promoted could fake. Brent didn't even look at me when he said, "Why don't you just listen in today, Robert? Let's give the next generation some real exposure." I smiled, like I was made of glass, and hadn't just been shattered in front of the whole room. And while my body sat through that meeting, my mind was somewhere else, rewinding the last 6 months, searching for when the shift started, the missed invites, the changed calendars, the way younger staff started calling me sir, like I was a visiting guest, and not the guy who once salvaged a 14 million account over a single weekend. But nothing hit harder than the silence. Not a rejection, not a thank you. Just a slow fade into irrelevance. And I would have left then, maybe would have packed up, driven home, told myself this was just how things go when you get older, when you get sick, if it weren't for one thing. I still had my hands on every contract Western Freight ever signed with us. I still knew where the leverage lived. And I wasn't done yet. I didn't expect applause for surviving cancer. I just thought someone would notice that I came back. After 6 grueling rounds of chemo and nearly 3 months working remotely with an IV drip by my side, I returned to Holloway Cross, not looking for sympathy, but hoping, maybe naively, for acknowledgement, a quiet gesture, a word of welcome, or even just a sense that I still belonged. Instead, I stepped into an office that moved on without me, like a living room rearranged while you were out grieving, where nothing fit quite right anymore. Brent never replied to the proposal I sent before treatment. Not even an automated acknowledgement. I told myself he was overwhelmed, maybe sorting out year-end audits, maybe just waiting for the right time. But what followed made it clear there was never going to be a right time. Not for someone like me. At first, it was subtle. I noticed calendar invites for client meetings where my name used to be. I watched junior analysts field questions I had trained them to ask. When I politely followed up on the compensation discussion, I received a single-line reply from HR. "We'll revisit during mid-year reviews." That review never came. Then came the seating shuffle. Logan, the kid who once shadowed me for a summer internship, was now listed as lead strategist on internal memos I hadn't even seen. My desk had been moved 2 rows back without warning, tucked between the printer and a column no one wanted. My nameplate was gone, and no one knew where it had gone. That was the day I realized I wasn't just being sidelined, I was being erased. During one weekly team sync, I watched Logan present a slide deck I had built 3 quarters ago. He read it awkwardly, flipping through jargon he didn't understand, but Brent nodded along like it was visionary. I waited for anyone, to look at me, to glance over and say, "Wasn't that Roberts?" But the only looks I got were quick, skittish, like I was contagious not because of the cancer, but because I reminded them of where loyalty gets you when you're no longer shiny. I began staying late, not out of obligation, but out of instinct. It was quieter then, and something about the silence helped me think not just about the work, but about the worth. One night, around 8 p.m., I sat alone in the office, lit by the cold glow of my monitor, and opened that old email again, the one Brent never read. The subject line stared back like a ghost of the man I used to be. Cone compensation, proposal metrics attached. I didn't hover over delete. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. I was just stunned by the clarity of it all. I had done everything right, produced results, built systems, trained teams, even carried the firm's most fragile account through a pandemic year. But I didn't play politics. I didn't brown nose. I didn't charm my way up the ladder. And apparently, that made me expendable. Within weeks, the cut went deeper. Another account pro-line distribution, which I had nursed from a chaotic startup into $1 million contract, was quietly moved under Logan's name. I found out through a meeting request forwarded to me by mistake. I walked into Brent's office, calm but steady, and asked if there was a reason I hadn't been included in the transition. He didn't look up from his laptop when he said, "We're trying to round out Logan's portfolio, give him some bigger fish to manage. I'm sure you understand." I forced a nod and replied, "I do. I just hope the client does too." He chuckled, as if we were sharing an inside joke. But there was nothing funny about watching your life's work passed off like a hand-me-down. That night, I didn't drive home right away. I sat in the parking lot, hands on the wheel, but the engine off, and I let the stillness wrap around me like armor. I wasn't crying because I was weak. I was crying because for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I felt like I didn't matter, not to the company, not to the team I'd helped build, and worst of all, not even to the man in the mirror who had always believed that loyalty would be enough. But even in that lowest hour, something in me refused to be written off. I didn't return to Holloway Cross the next day out of habit. I returned because I still had something to prove, not to them, but to myself. If they wanted me gone, they would have to look me in the eye and say it. And if they couldn't, then I would find a way to remind them exactly who I was, not through complaints or confrontation, but through the kind of quiet, calculated resolve they never saw coming. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my value. And if they couldn't see it now, well, they'd feel the absence soon enough. It wasn't one big betrayal. It was a slow, deliberate process, like erosion, quiet but relentless, until the foundation beneath you simply isn't there anymore. The real shift came on a Monday morning, not unlike any other gray skies. Burnt coffee in the break room, and a vague sense of heaviness I had stopped questioning. I walked into conference room B, where I had led our Western Freight alignment calls every week for 5 years, only to find the seating rearranged. My name wasn't on the agenda. Logan sat at the head of the table, flipping through a branded slide deck I hadn't seen before, speaking in the jargon-heavy tone of someone trying too hard to sound in control. I stood frozen for a moment, scanning the room for acknowledgement, but the eyes that met mine did so only briefly, apologetically, even nervously before darting away again. Brent gestured vaguely toward an empty seat in the back, not quite looking at me when he said, "Let's let Logan take point today." Fresh voice, new angle. I managed a polite nod, though inside I felt the twist of something far worse than anger and visibility. It wasn't just the meeting, it was the tone afterward. The way the younger staff, once eager for my feedback, now circled around Logan, laughing too loudly, asking questions they used to bring to me. I overheard one of the interns whisper, "Wasn't that Robert's meeting?" Only to be hushed with a quick, "Shh, don't make it awkward." Later that week, my inbox delivered another blow, a calendar invite for a client transfer session, listing me as an optional attendee. Proline Distribution, my account for nearly 7 years, was being transitioned. There had been no conversation, no notice, just an impersonal block of text with meeting logistics and the name of the new lead, Logan Walsh. It was all there, as clear as a dismissal without saying the word. I sat through that call like a man watching his own obituary being read aloud. Logan introduced himself with confidence, even joked about bringing fresh energy to the partnership. The client's face, a VP I'd flown to meet during her daughter's school fundraiser years ago, flickered with confusion but said nothing. When the call ended, Brent messaged me a single line. "Appreciate you letting this shift happen smoothly." I didn't reply. What was there to say? That Friday, I found myself back in my car again, this time in the company parking lot with my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. But I didn't drive away. Instead, I stared at the building, the same building I had arrived at every morning for 26 years, and I realized something that cut deeper than any diagnosis. They weren't just trying to replace me. They were trying to rewrite me out of the story entirely. And worse, they assumed I wouldn't fight it, that I was too tired, too old, or too polite to push back. The final confirmation came at our quarterly all-hands meeting, a meticulously choreographed event designed more for optics than substance. Brent stood before the entire staff, flanked by Logan and two other up-and-comers, his voice steady and polished as he spoke of realignment and streamlining. Then came the dagger. "We have tremendous respect for legacy contributions," he said, "but tenure alone doesn't always equal relevance. Moving forward, we'll be investing in adaptive leadership, talent that reflects the evolving direction of our firm." No names were mentioned, but his eyes landed on me for just a second too long. It was brief, but unmistakable, the kind of glance that carries the full weight of an accusation without the courage of saying it out loud. I felt the oxygen drain from the room. Colleagues looked down. Some shuffled uncomfortably. A few looked at me with pity. Others simply looked away. Logan sat with his arms folded, smirking just slightly, as if he'd already won something I didn't even know I was competing for. But I didn't flinch. I took notes. I kept my posture straight. And when the meeting ended, I walked out not because I was defeated, but because I needed air and space to think. I understood then that this wasn't neglect anymore. This was strategic, calculated. A company that didn't want the scandal of firing a cancer survivor, but didn't want the cost of keeping him either. They wanted me to leave, quietly, voluntarily, as if it were my idea. And in their arrogance, they thought I would. But I've never been good at quitting, not when it mattered. So I stayed. I showed up early, left late, and watched the seams begin to stretch. I saw cracks form in Logan's account reports. I overheard panic in conversations when clients started asking the wrong questions. And in that quiet space, I began to prepare not a resignation, but a reckoning. Because if they wanted to erase me, they should have done it before I learned how to vanish on my own terms and take the foundation with me when I go. It didn't happen with a dramatic outburst or some grand declaration, no slamming doors, no fiery resignation letter. The shift began the way most reckonings do. In silence, late at night, with a man at his desk, and too many open tabs that meant more than they appeared. It was just past 8 p.m. on a Tuesday when I found myself back in the office long after everyone had left. The building, once a place of pride and purpose, now felt like a museum filled with relics of other people's futures. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, not sure whether I was about to write a resignation or a resurrection. I opened my archived emails, searching for, proof maybe, or closure, and stumbled on something I had forgotten existed. It was a message from 6 months ago, sent by the director of strategy at Redstone Freight Systems, the very client I had built a decade-long relationship with, and the same one that Logan was now fumbling to retain. Her name was Natalie Barrett. The last line of her email read, "If this company ever forgets your value, call me. We'd be lucky to have someone like you on our side." I sat there, stunned, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat on pause. I hadn't responded at the time. I was still trying to make things work at Holloway Cross, still holding on. But now, that single sentence felt like a rope thrown across a chasm I hadn't realized I was standing in. I didn't rush to reply. I wasn't desperate, I was focused. Over the next 3 days, I combed through every piece of correspondence I'd ever had with Redstone contracts, strategy decks, launch timelines, risk assessments, even holiday messages. I wasn't gathering ammunition. I was reclaiming authorship. These weren't just files, they were the living history of what I had built, piece by piece, crisis by crisis. None of it was proprietary, but all of it bore my fingerprints. Clean, trackable, undeniable. I began sketching a roadmap, not just of my exit, but of a transition so seamless and quiet that by the time they noticed I was gone, the foundation would already be missing from beneath them. When I finally emailed Natalie, I kept it brief. Your message meant more than you know. If the conversation is still open, I'd be willing to explore possibilities informally. At first, I read it twice before sending, and when I clicked send, it felt less like reaching out and more like reclaiming something I'd let them steal without a fight. Her reply came just 20 minutes later. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., I'll send a link. We've been waiting for this moment. That last line hit something in me that had long gone quiet. The next morning, I ironed my best shirt, not for show, but because sometimes dignity starts with the small things. I logged into the call early, breathing slowly, steadying myself not for a job interview, but for a conversation between people who still knew how to speak plainly and with respect. Natalie appeared on screen, poised, direct, and without pleasantries. We've been evaluating our agency partnerships, she said. And frankly, since your absence, we've felt the difference. We've started internal discussions about building out our strategic division in-house, and if you're open to it, we'd want you to lead it. I blinked. Not because I was surprised by her offer, but because it was spoken so plainly, like it had always been meant for me, and they had just been waiting for me to remember it. I asked questions. I clarified expectations. I negotiated, not because I needed to prove anything, but because I had earned the right to be thorough. By the time the call ended, I wasn't nervous or overwhelmed. I was anchored by clarity, by purpose, and by the knowledge that somewhere out there, my value hadn't been erased by youth or buried under politics. It had simply been misplaced, and now it was being returned to the hands that had carried it all along. I didn't give notice that day. Not yet, because while I was done playing defense, I wasn't done making sure the weight of my absence would be felt not out of spite, but out of principle. The same way they quietly removed me, I would quietly take everything I had built and offer it to a place that still recognized substance over show. For the first time in months, I slept soundly, not because the storm had passed, but because I finally remembered I was the one holding the lightning. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It came with an email. Cold, pólita, devastating. Redstone, Freight, our crown jewel account, the one that had carried Holloway, crossed through recessions, leadership shakeups, and investor retreats, terminated its contract with a single paragraph. No warning, no negotiation, no sentiment, just a clean line from procurement. We are discontinuing agency services effective immediately. We appreciate your past support. The office erupted in chaos by noon. Conference rooms that sat quiet for months were suddenly booked back to back. People whispered in panicked tones, passing blame like a hot coal no one wanted to hold. I watched it all unfold from behind my monitor, the same way you might observe a wildfire from a distance, not because it didn't concern me, but because I had already walked through the smoke and come out clean on the other side. Logan was pulled into a closed-door meeting just minutes after the news broke. His face, once smug and composed, now showed the cracks of someone who had been handed a responsibility he never earned and couldn't maintain. Brent's usually confident stride had turned stiff and uneasy. He paced the hallway with red-ringed eyes and a jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might snap his own teeth. And me? I typed. Calmly. Deliberately. I wasn't gloating. That's not who I am. But I wasn't grieving either, because I knew this wasn't just a lost client. This was the unraveling of a narrative they had spent months constructing, that I was replaceable, outdated, quietly disposable. And now, without ever raising my voice, I had written a new ending, one they didn't see coming because they had stopped paying attention to the only story that mattered. By the following Monday, the atmosphere in the office had changed entirely. Not in the way morale shifts after a bad quarter, but in the way a ship creaks when the hull has cracked and everyone's just waiting to hear the water come in. People spoke in half sentences. Eye contact became rare. Brent canceled the weekly team address for the first time in 6 years. His usual walk around the floor, coffee, cup in hand, and catchphrases at the ready, was replaced by a closed door and silence. It wasn't just Redstone. Within days, 2 more clients, ones I had quietly nurtured years ago, sent formal notices requesting renegotiations, citing inconsistencies in strategic direction. Of course, no one dared say it outright, but the whispers carried the weight of truth. They wanted to know where I had gone, and, more importantly, whether I could be reached. Then came the call. It wasn't from Natalie this time. It was from Redstone's chief operating officer, a man I had only met once during a high-stakes contract negotiation in 2017. His voice was measured, but not cold. "Robert," he said, "we've been rethinking our approach to in-house strategy. Our board just approved the formation of a new division, Client Innovation Intelligence. We'd like you to lead it." I sat still for a moment, my breath catching just enough to remind me this was real. Not just a job offer, not just recognition. It was the thing they had tried to bury rising. He continued, outlining the details. Full autonomy, direct reporting to the executive suite, flexible terms, remote-first options, and compensation that, frankly, would have been unimaginable at Holloway. He ended the call with a sentence I'll never forget. "We're not hiring you to fill a role. We're building the role around your leadership." I didn't respond right away. Not because I had doubts, but because I wanted to be intentional. I sat with the offer, not as someone scrambling for escape, but as someone choosing the right moment to walk into the light after too long in the shadows. That night, I typed up my formal acceptance. It was concise, professional, and laced with a quiet triumph I didn't need to underline. I hit send, closed my laptop, and leaned back in my chair with a long, steady breath. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like justice. The next morning, Brent emerged from his glass-walled office looking 10 years older. His tie was crooked, his eyes were bloodshot, and his usual veneer of corporate charm had been stripped down to bare bone. He walked over to my desk, a place he hadn't approached in months, and asked, "Do you have a minute?" I followed him to the boardroom, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. He closed the door gently and turned around with the look of a man trying to reverse a decision he never fully understood to begin with. "So, Redstone," he began, pretending not to already know the answer. "Do you happen to know why they pulled out?" I looked him in the eye, measured, calm. I assume it wasn't about the weather. He gave a dry laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, Robert. I know things got tense. Maybe I misjudged the dynamics. But if there's anything you can offer us, insight, feedback, a possible way to re-engage." He trailed off, and I let the silence hang there just long enough for him to feel it. "6 months ago," I said evenly, "I sent you a proposal outlining exactly what Redstone needed to feel secure and supported. You never opened it. You also reassigned my accounts without cause, undermined my role publicly, and elevated someone who had never managed a real client." He tried to reply, but I wasn't finished. "I've accepted an offer from Redstone. I'll be heading their new division starting next week." His face went pale, and for the first time since this entire saga began, I saw it the moment it hit him, that I had never truly left the room. They had just stopped seeing me. "You're serious?" he asked, voice lower now. "Dead serious." And I walked out, not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet certainty that I had reclaimed every piece of myself they tried to write off. I didn't clear out my desk. There wasn't much left to take. Over time, they had removed the artifacts of my presence, the family photos, the awards, the notes from grateful clients, but they had missed the most important part, the legacy I carried with me in every decision, every call, every deal I had ever closed. And now, that legacy had found a new home, one that didn't ask me to shrink, to wait, or to vanish. I didn't pack up in the traditional sense. There was no farewell cake, no signatures on a Hallmark card, no awkward group photo in front of the company logo. By the time I left Holloway Cross, there was barely anything left at my desk to claim, not because I had cleaned it out, but because over the months, they had already stripped it of its meaning. The framed certificate from Redstone, the small wooden plaque for crisis resolution excellence, the family picture from my son's wedding, all had been removed under the guise of desk standardization, though no one else's space seemed to change. And I didn't mind, because the most important things I carried weren't physical, they were the relationships I had nurtured, the strategies I had built, and the quiet resilience I had sharpened in the shadows. I paused for a moment as I passed the break room, hearing the buzz of people too nervous to ask where I was going. And I felt nothing but peace, not because I hadn't been wrong, but because I had finally chosen myself over waiting for someone else to do it for me. As I stepped into the elevator, the doors began to close and then they caught, pausing for someone else. It was Logan. He stepped in, hesitated for a moment, then asked, "You're leaving?" I nodded, not unkindly, but firmly. His eyes flickered not with regret, but with something closer to doubt, like he had just realized the weight of the shoes he had been trying to fill. So, it's true. You're joining Redstone? I didn't confirm. I didn't need to. The silence did more for my reputation than any title ever could. Good luck, he said quietly. You deserve it. That surprised me not because I needed his validation, but because it came from a place I hadn't expected. I offered a nod and replied, Take care of the team. They're better than the leadership thinks. The door slid shut, not with finality, but with the soft certainty of a chapter closing on its own terms. Driving home, the city looked different not because it had changed, but because I had. For the first time in over 2 decades, I wasn't carrying the pressure of a team, a title, or an approval I'd never get. I was driving toward a new beginning, one that wasn't built on who I used to be, but on who I had become by surviving everything they tried to silence. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and logged into my new company email, robert.west@redstoneintelligence.com. It blinked back at me, simple and unassuming, yet full of promise. The welcome message at the top read, We're honored to have you. Let's build something exceptional together. I leaned back in my chair, eyes stinging not from exhaustion, but from a joy I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes not from arrival, but from return. A return to purpose, to respect, and to myself. But the story didn't end there. Over the next few weeks, I received messages not just from Redstone employees, but from former clients at Holloway, ones I hadn't spoken to in years. They weren't writing to reminisce. They were inquiring, asking where I had gone, if I'd be open to a conversation, if perhaps there was room for their business under this new vision I was building. I didn't pitch. I didn't push. I simply listened, and with each call, I felt it. The quiet power of legacy. The same clients who had once been told I was being phased out were now following my lead, not because I had chased them, but because they had always trusted my compass, even when the firm I served no longer did. Back at Holloway, I heard things weren't faring well. Staff turnover had doubled. Clients were backing out of fourth quarter deals. Brent had gone oddly silent on LinkedIn, and Logan had been moved to a non-client facing department, something to do with restructuring. I didn't revel in it. I didn't need to, because some lessons don't need to be shouted, they just need time and gravity to land where they belong. Looking back, I realize now that power isn't loud. It doesn't always sit at the head of the table or wear a nameplate on a corner office door. Sometimes it's the person who absorbs the losses, keeps the receipts, and walks away when it's time not to run, but to rise. If you've ever been overlooked, dismissed, or told that your best days were behind, you know this. They weren't. They aren't. And you're not alone. Sometimes the most powerful statement you'll ever make isn't in the meeting room or the exit interview. It's in the silence that follows, the kind that speaks louder than applause. Have you ever walked away from a place that stopped seeing your worth? What did it cost and what did you gain in return? I want to hear your story, because someone out there needs to know they're not alone. Share your comeback in the comments. Let's remind each other. We don't fade, we evolve.